So it's been almost half a year since I've last uploaded a video, but I'm so excited about the next fast-paced mobile card game, Pokemon Pocket, and I felt compelled to make a large video discussing literally everything you might want to know about the modern approach to the classic card game. In this video, I will not be making comparisons to Pokemon TCG Live, I will not be assuming the legacy cards from Pokemon TCG will appear in Pokemon Pocket, and instead I will only be using information available about Pokemon Pocket to evaluate Pokemon Pocket. The only assumptions I'll bring over from the TCG is like how attacks work and stuff like that. The reason I say this is because I think it's important to not assume too much about Pokemon Pocket. There's a lot they can do in a digital environment, especially if they're going for a slower tempo-based style of gameplay. There's some fundamental assumptions you might make about Pokemon trading card game that don't apply to Pokemon Pocket. Something as simple as the Pokemon you start with in play might not be a card you select from your opening hand. Instead, it might just be before you draw your opening hand, they select a card from your deck randomly. So now that I have that preamble out of the way, I'm not going to be talking about the regular Pokemon TCG at all, because quite frankly, I haven't played it very much. I only recently started playing it because of how excited I am about Pokemon Pocket, and I haven't even really been playing Pokemon trading card game. I've been playing a legacy format called Gym Leader Challenge. So my knowledge of at least the competitive scene of the Pokemon trading card game is incredibly limited. And quite honestly, I assume a lot of people watching this video and a lot of people who are going to be playing Pocket fall into a similar category where they're not quite familiar with the Pokemon trading card game. Maybe they're familiar with it from a collection standpoint, but I think there's going to be a lot of new players playing Pokemon Pocket, and that's the exact goal of Pokemon Pocket, I think. So let's focus on how to play for a moment. The objective in Pokemon Pocket is to earn 3 points. The first person to do so is the winner of the match. KOing an enemy Pokemon will award you 1 point. EX Pokemon are a little bit stronger than normal Pokemon. They have a unique trait that awards the player KOing them an additional point. So KOing one EX Pokemon is worth 2 regular Pokemon. So to win a match, you end up having to KO either 3 of your opponent's Pokemon or 1 EX Pokemon on their side and then any other Pokemon. Let's take a look at the game board for a moment. We can see a few different zones. Your hand, for the record, the most amount of cards we've seen in a player's hand is 6. A deck, which we know has 20 cards. Your active zone, this is where your Pokemon are going to battle each other. And your bench, which are Pokemon that are considered in play, but attacks don't affect Pokemon unless they're in the active zone or unless the card states otherwise. Like a card might say something like deal 20 damage to a Pokemon on the enemy bench. And lastly, the energy zone. We're going to avoid talking about the energy zone because there's so little we know about it. Let's quickly read a Pokemon card for those who have never read a Pokemon card before. Here's all the information you need to read. The state of the card describes what point the Pokemon is in its evolutionary line. These numbers count from 0, so basic Pokemon is like stage 0, stage 1 is the next step in the evolutionary tree, and stage 2 is the Pokemon's final form. If the Pokemon is an EX Pokemon, that EX text will appear to the right of their display name. The Pokemon's HP and the type that they are listed in the top right. Very rarely so far in Pokemon Pocket, but some Pokemon have abilities that are clearly labeled as such. You'll recognize this formatting a lot when you start looking at each card. It's some symbol types, or some types of symbols, then a word, and then a number. This is an attack. The symbols indicate how much the attack costs, the word is the name of the attack, and the number is the amount of damage it's dealing. Weakness is simply the type of Pokemon that this Pokemon is vulnerable to. So in this case, Greninja receives 20 additional damage from lightning Pokemon. So if Greninja would receive 60 damage from a lightning, he'll instead receive 80. The retreat cost of a Pokemon is how much it costs to have your card switch from your active zone to your bench. You can never have your active zone empty, so when you do that, you'll have to select a new Pokemon to go switch with it. Unlike attacking, retreating discards the cost from the Pokemon. Quickly, we can discuss trainer cards. Trainer cards are like actions or spells or instants, depending on your preferred card game. And basically, the way trainers works is you play them once and they go straight to your discard pile. Some trainer cards are supporters. I like to think of supporters as the EX equivalent for trainer cards. They are a bit stronger than the average trainer card, but with a downside. The downside of EX cards is that they're worth 2 points for the opponent, while the downside for supporter cards is that you can only play 1 supporter card per turn, which isn't the case for regular trainer cards. You can play as many of those as you want per turn. So I wanted to go over every single card that has been revealed so far for Pokemon Pocket so that I had a good baseline to understand future card reveals. So I started by categorizing each card because it's obviously silly to compare the stats of an EX card and a non-EX card. These are the categories I ended up with. Small basic, small stage 1, big stage 1, stage 2, basic EX, EX stage 1, and EX stage 2. The big and small terminology is just to denote whether or not the card can evolve. small basic Pokemon can evolve and small stage 1 Pokemon can evolve, but their big counterparts are capped out at whatever they're at. Then I added each of their stats to a spreadsheet to calculate their median and average values. In most cases, I'm going to be going off of the median value because it's usually more accurate than the average value. If you're not familiar with these two terms, you can think of median as average. A median is basically a calculation of average that removes the outliers. So now that I had the median values of each of these stats that I'd paid attention to, I had my baselines to start evaluating cards. For the record, the baseline for small Pokemon, so these are basic Pokemon that can evolve into stage 1 Pokemon, is 60 HP, 1 cost retreat, a 1 cost attack, 20 damage, and a DPE value of 20. DPE is a term I'll be using a lot in this video, but essentially it stands for damage per energy, and it's the expected amount of damage you can get for each energy you spend on the card. Well, technically not for each energy up until you have like the maximum amount of energy you would need on the card. Here are all of these small basic Pokemon that are currently revealed that are at the exact baseline for small basic Pokemon, with the exception being Bulbasaur, who's 10 HP above the baseline, but didn't fit into any of my other graphics that I'll be showing you. Here are the Pokemon that are below baseline. Paris has 10 HP above it, but below the DPE baseline and a 2 energy attack. So you have to commit more to using Paris's ability, and even when you do, her DPE is lower than what you would be getting if you spent it on a different Pokemon. Diglett has 50 HP, 10 less than the baseline. Slowpoke has an above baseline HP, but below baseline DPE and a 2 energy attack, not to mention his high retreat cost. Magikarp is tied with another card we haven't talked about yet for the lowest HP value in the game at just 30, not to mention his incredibly low DPE. Magikarp's going to need a big Gyarados or something to make him playable. Sizzlipede matches the baseline HP, but has half the baseline DPE and damage. These Pokemon have some interesting trade-offs that go either way. Dratini is basically the Bulbasaur we went over earlier. He has 10 HP above the baseline, and the DPE value matches our baseline, but he has a higher energy cost investment because it's a 2-cost attack. I also wanted to mention that Dratini has 2 different energy types required to use her attack, and honestly, that's really thrown a wrench in a lot of our theories about how the energy zone works. So yeah, we really don't know how this energy zone thing works. We'll figure it out later. It's not important for this video. Wooloo is similar to both Bulbasaur and Dratini in that she has a 2-cost attack, but the payoff is worse with only 30 damage and a below average baseline, or a below baseline DPE, I should say. Machop is strictly just above the baseline. His HP is 10 greater, and the only thing really working against him right now is the small exception of having a 2-cost retreat, which is obviously more expensive than our baseline. The following small basic Pokemon have unique pieces of utility that other Pokemon simply just don't provide. Psyduck shuts down supporter cards, Meltan has access to self-energy ramp, Cubone has some defensive properties which could be useful for tempo, Abra can switch out without having to use his retreat cost, meaning he doesn't need to discard his energy the same way that other Pokemon would if they were trying to retreat, though he is going to end your turn because attacking in Pokemon ends your turn. Vulpix is damage prevention tied to randomness. The math on Vulpix isn't looking particularly well. You have to flip a coin, win the coin flip, and then your opponent needs to not have an answer to get past that. So it's like a less than 50% chance of her protecting herself because she's only protecting herself from the defender of that attack. So it doesn't stop the opponent switching out to a different Pokemon and killing her that way or dealing damage to her that way. So Vulpix is really vulnerable. Meowth is the only Pokemon who has access to card draw so far. Tianmo has a really high DPE despite his low energy cost attack. And I wanted to put this in utility despite the fact that it's like a damaging thing because there's no real way to get that amount of burst damage out of a 1-cost thing for free on a basic small Pokemon. So there's a little bit of utility there that's worth keeping in mind. And lastly, we'll talk about Grimer, who is mathematically the best Pokemon in the small basic Pokemon slot. His only downside is his outrageous 3-cost retreat. If we disregard that for just a moment, Grimer's DPE is within our baseline over the course of 1 turn because Poison, assuming it does the same thing as it does in TCG, deals 10 damage each turn. So the initial activation of Grimer's effect is dealing 20 damage effectively, and you're still investing the Poison status condition over the opponent's active Pokemon. Like I said, other than his 3-cost retreat, Grimer is absolutely insane for a small basic Pokemon. Next, I'd like to take a look at big basic Pokemon. Our baseline is going to be 110 HP, 1-cost retreat, 1.8 average attack cost, meaning that we're starting to see more 2-cost attacks than we are 1-cost attacks, 40 damage, and 25 DPE. Electabuzz is well below our baseline HP and has self-damage, but he can deal a high amount of burst damage. Lickitung is potentially infinite damage, but he also has a below baseline HP. He can potentially deal 0 damage. He has a 3 retreat cost and an absolutely insane energy investment of 3 before we can even activate this ability once to again potentially deal 0 damage. Hitmonlee has below baseline HP but above baseline DPE and the ability to deal damage to the opponent's benched Pokemon, which is a really unique piece of utility. Hitmonchan is just like Hitmonlee but without the damage to the opponent's bench. That's not to say Hitmonchan's bad. Like I said, there was still a lot about Hitmonlee that was good outside of his benched targeting. He's still above baseline DPE for 1 cost. Lapras has just about baseline HP but with a 2 cost retreat. Her DPE is difficult to evaluate because it's a flexible ability. For what it's worth, she's below baseline DPE while at 1 energy invested, but above baseline DPE while at 3 energy invested. Chansey has above baseline damage and above baseline health, but has a high investment cost below baseline DPE and above baseline retreat cost at 3 retreat. Kangaskhan's math looks really compelling to me. He has about baseline HP, just a little bit under. Sadly, he has a 25% chance of dealing 0 damage, but he also has a 25% chance of dealing 60 damage for just 1 energy, and a 75% chance of dealing at least 30 damage. So 75% of the time, he is strictly better than Hitmonchan, but sometimes he just deals 0 or 60 damage. Small stage 1 Pokemon are up next, and sadly, they're quite weak. It's likely the case that the primary function for small stage 1 Pokemon is just going to be getting you to your stage 2 Pokemon, and as a result, they're all going to be pretty underwhelming. For what it's worth though, we only have a really small sample size of just 3 stage 1 Pokemon, so there's still plenty of room for them to do interesting, unique things. With that in mind, our baseline is extremely skewed for stage 1 Pokemon. Our baseline is 80 HP, 1 cost retreat, 2 cost attack, 30 damage, and 15 DPE. Just for reference, the only baseline stat of the small stage 1 Pokemon that is bigger than our small basic Pokemon is the total damage number and the HP. There's not much to talk about for Corellia because she's exactly at the baseline stats, so she's very much a vanilla card. Haunter has a cheap attack at just 1 energy compared to the other Pokemon here, and Metapod has a 2 cost retreat, making him worse than the baseline. Big stage 1 Pokemon are substantially more powerful than small stage 1 Pokemon. From this point on, each Pokemon is going to have their own pros and cons, and they're going to drift further and further away from the baseline. With that said, our baseline is 110 HP, 1 cost retreat, 2 cost attack, 80 damage, and 36 DPE. Technically, it's 36.6 DPE, which we're just going to round up for simplicity's sake to 40. Primeape has a conditional 100 damage output, which is above our baseline, but has a below baseline HP, and of course, that 100 damage is conditional. Aerodactyl has an extremely powerful disruption effect with a slightly below baseline HP. Jolteon has a conditional 160 damage that has an expected value of 80 damage. Unfortunately, his HP is lower than the baseline, and he has about a 6.25% chance of dealing 0 damage. Vaporeon has a net swing of 90 HP and an above baseline HP. Sadly, her damage and DPE is below baseline, and she has a 2 cost retreat, but in theory, the swing of 90 HP just consistently is quite compelling, and the sustain's potentially quite oppressive in a slower tempo-oriented game like this. Flareon has an above baseline damage, DPE, and health, but his effect discards his energy and has a 2 cost retreat. Raichu has well above the average damage and DPE baseline, and a slightly lower baseline HP, but his effect discards all of his energy, so you really probably want to end up using Raichu as your final hit of the game. Slowbro has a base HP that's really quite high. He's right on the baseline of damage, but below the baseline DPE. A really high energy amount needs to be invested before you can start attacking with Slowbro. He also has a high retreat cost at 3. Stage 2 Pokemon, so far at least, all have unique abilities, which is really exciting, but it makes evaluating them a little bit more difficult. As a result, their baseline is going to be less important than the other Pokemon we've talked about so far. Not to mention that we've only seen 3 Stage 2 Pokemon, so we have a really small sample size to work with for creating our baseline. Regardless, the baseline is 120 HP, 1 retreat cost, 2.5 attack cost, 80 damage, and 25 DPE. Pidgeot has the highest health of all 3 of these Pokemon and the highest damaging attack. Despite her stats being the most compelling, her ability is also extremely powerful. Being able to use this ability from the bench to disrupt your opponent's game plan is going to be super powerful. It's probably, of all of these Pokemon, one of the ones that I'm most excited about. Greninja's stats fall somewhere in the middle with a relatively cost-effective attack, but really Greninja's primary selling point is going to be his ability, which is just a free 20 damage you get every time. turn. No energy cost required. Gardevoir's ability is really difficult to evaluate because it directly interacts with the one system we don't know about yet, which is the energy zone. So I'll avoid commenting on it too much right now. With that said, ramp is typically good in card games. Finally, we can talk about EX Pokemon for the first time. The baseline of the 5 revealed basic EX Pokemon is 140 health, 2 cost retreat, 2.2 average cost for an attack, 75 attack damage, and a 40 DPE. Pikachu EX has up to 90 damage, an extremely high DPE for a 2 cost attack, a premium retreat cost for this type of Pokemon, but does fall short on total HP for basic EX Pokemon. Mewtwo EX has an above baseline HP, DPE, and damage. Additionally, he has 2 different attacks. His only downside being is that his higher damaging attack discards 2 energy from himself. Zapdos EX has 200 damage tied to a random effect with an expected value of 100 damage. He has 2 attacks, one of which, sadly, Peck, is well below the DPE baseline, and Hurricane Wing has a 25% chance of doing 0 damage. Moltres EX is another card that is difficult to evaluate without knowing exactly how the energy zone system works. For whatever it's worth mentioning though, I'll say that Heat Blast is below our baseline DPE, and we're gonna have to wait and see how we feel about the energy zone interaction because we don't know how it works yet. Articuno EX has 2 attacks like most of the basic EX Pokemon. Articuno's Ice Wing is below the baseline DPE and damage, but Blizzard is within or above our baseline depending on how you choose to calculate the split damage and his damage pings that happen to the bench. We also have Pokemon Stage 1 and Stage 2 EX cards, but there isn't much of a reason to calculate their baseline because there's only 1 card revealed for each. Lastly, I do want to mention Venusaur EX, which can't perfectly be deciphered because it was only like partially revealed, but we do have a good idea of what he does. 190 HP is higher than the Charizard we saw before. He has a 3-cost attack that deals 60 damage and a 4-cost attack that deals 100 damage with the text heal 50 damage from this Pokemon. Sadly, that's accompanied by a 3-cost retreat. Charizard does have more damage than Venusaur, so he's better at dealing with single targets, but Venusaur might end up being a better quote-unquote carry because he's going to do better against the field of potential cards just because of that built-in sustain. Let's quickly go over trainer cards. There's only 5 to talk about. Potion heals one of your Pokemon for 30. Pokeball takes a random basic Pokemon from your deck and adds it to your hand. Erica can heal only grass Pokemon for 50, 20 more than Potion, though remember she's a supporter, so you can only play 1 copy of Erica per turn, or maybe you won't be able to play Erica at all because you've played another supporter during the turn. Sabrina forces the opponent to swap their Pokemon, she's a supporter as well, and Brock is an energy ramp card specifically for fighting Pokemon and more specifically for Onix or Golem. Based on the Pokemon that have been revealed to us so far, we can reasonably guess the following Pokemon will also appear in Pokemon Pocket's first set. Kadabra, Alakazam, Growlithe, Weeping Bell, I don't remember the name of the 3rd evolution, Ivysaur, Charmander, Charmeleon, Clefable, Marowak, Melmetal, Persian, Caterpie, Butterfree, I don't know her name, Nidoran, Nidoking, Gloom, Vileplume, Ninetales, Dugtrio, Dragonair, Dragonite, Ralts, Froakie, I don't remember the middle evolution, Muck, Machoke, Machamp, Gyarados, Parasect, Pidgey, Pidgeot, Golduck, Saladance, I think is the name of this one, I don't remember, Cloyster, I forget the name of this one as well, Wartortle, and whatever the name of these last 2 is. Because of the Brock trainer card, we can reasonably assume that Geodude, Graveler, Golem, and Onix will all be in the base set as well. Let's quickly go over what these rarity icons mean. This diamond icon is kind of like our basic rarity icon. The more diamonds on a card, the more rare the card is. Generally speaking, small basics and trainers are 1 diamond, supporters, big basics, and stage 1s are 2 diamonds, stage 2s and other things that can't evolve are 3 diamonds, and EX cards are 4 diamonds. Those rules aren't always true, but generally speaking, that's how it plays out. Now, what about these stars? The obvious difference between these stars and the cards we just went over is that they have full arts. These are cosmetics that you can pull in packs just like any other card, but they're kind of like duplicates of basic cards just with a twist to them. Think of them as skins or variants or whatever equivalent makes sense to you. They work just in the same way as the diamonds do in that the more stars you have, the more rare the card is, but they're simply alternate arts that don't affect the gameplay in any way. 1-star cards are basics, 2-star cards are EXs, and 3 stars are cinematic animations. Sadly, I assume these cinematic cards will also only be EX cards. While we're on the subject of cosmetics, I should mention that we've also seen an Eeveelution playmat and an Eevee coin, so that's at least two things we'll be able to customize, our playmat and our coins. I also assume we'll be able to customize card backs as well, but we haven't actually seen that yet. Remember before how I said there was 226 cards? Well, on that same screen where we can find that information, we see that this player's collection has 286 available cards to collect. I believe the extra 60 cards are all star rarity cards, meaning they are simply cosmetic. It's also possible that the remaining 60 cards are starter cards that you just start the game with, but that seems unlikely because this screen is specifically about Genetic Apex, which is hard to tell because it's in a different language, so it would be strange to me that the starter cards were included in the Genetic Apex set. Charizard EX is announced to have a cinematic card, but we haven't seen it yet, and I think it's reasonable to assume that Venusaur and Blastoise will also have cinematic cards. At the time of me recording, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but this is the currently revealed generation ratios, so the amount of representation each generation has, and then on the right is going to be all of the generation representation if you assume the previously mentioned Pokemon that may or may not be coming to the game based on the currently revealed Pokemon do indeed come to the game. As you can see, Generation 1 is extremely overrepresented, but it is what it is. I hope that what they do is in Set 2, Generation 2 is overrepresented, and in Set 3, Generation 3 is overrepresented. I went to go do a data analysis of all of the packs that we've seen opened in videos from different events, but after looking at those ratios, there's zero chance that those ratios are going to show up in the game. The odds were just way too stacked in the player's favor, so I assume it was either juiced up for the player event or it's just juiced up on whatever build they were playing with. What I did notice, however, is that certain packs are labeled, not just based on the card that's on the cover art, but Charizard packs have Genetic Apex Charizard, Genetic Apex Pikachu, Genetic Apex Mewtwo, and I wonder if there's any functional difference between those packs or not. Like maybe there's slightly increased odds of pulling a Pikachu if you use the Genetic Apex Pikachu pack. Just something to keep in mind. The next thing I want to mention is original art versus art that was used in the Pokemon trading card game in the past. Here is the total number of cards revealed. Here are the total number of cards that are reusing artwork from previous Pokemon trading card game art, and then here is the number of unique cards. I think this is a pretty good split. You want kind of a decent split between nostalgic cards, like cards that people recognize, and then also just like unique pieces of art that are new to the game to make the game actually feel unique. I think those numbers will surprise people. I think a lot of people just assumed all of the art in Pokemon Pocket was reused. It's not. We've seen certain account notifications at certain collection milestones, specifically at 25 cards collected and 50 cards collected. One thing to mention about this is that if we look at the 25 cards collected screen, you'll see that these 25 cards cover a wide range of types and likely don't come together to create a specific 20 card deck, which would be strange because it means you wouldn't be able to start playing until you have enough cards. I assume whatever starter deck you receive at the start of the game is separate from the 25 cards collected screen, or else this collected screen would look really different, or maybe it's just marketing material and everything I'm talking about right now doesn't matter. It's also worth mentioning that if we do have some type of starter cards, they probably won't let you trade those cards because you don't want to end up in a scenario where you've accidentally locked yourself out from being able to play the game because you've traded the wrong cards away. Speaking of which, this game actually has card trading in it. Trading is an extremely unique feature for a digital card game. Digital card games are generally scared of implementing trading cards just due to the fact that there's going to be third-party markets and there's going to be account manipulation, especially because this game gives you quite a bit of free stuff every day. You could just have multiple accounts running and then trade in kind of like a malicious way that the game doesn't necessarily intend you to. So I'm curious to see how they choose to tackle those particular issues leading into a game that seems so I'll say player friendly. A system called Wonder Pick has been talked about, and it seems to let you acquire cards from players' packs that have recently been opened. I assume that these are going to be mostly friends. I'm actually not exactly sure how this system works. People have compared this system to like Wonder Trading from the traditional Pokemon handheld games, but I actually don't see any specific reason to believe this system will be similar to Wonder Sharing or Wonder Trading outside of the fact that they have the word Wonder in their name. I hope to be wrong because Wonder Pick sounds like a cool system. I just don't really know the details yet. Let me tell you about the Eevee problem we've seen. There's 3 different arts for Eevee, which is weird, right? One is the base art card. So this is the card that you get in Genetic APAC. And then there's this extra one, which is the full art version. This is like remember how before we talked about the differences between cards that have diamonds on them and cards that have stars on them? This full art version of Eevee is simply just the one with the star on it. But there's a third Eevee. We don't know why, but on this screen, there's just like a third Eevee chilling with the Eeveelutions. My guess is that this is some type of promo art exclusive for some type of promotion. happen, maybe like a bundle or something like that. But for now, we don't exactly know what this extra Eevee is just doing there, just chilling for no reason. We've seen a collection screen that mentions binders and display boards and decks are obvious, right? We know what decks are, but I'm not entirely confident what a display border is or a binder is. But just to throw a few ideas around, the screen we just talked about with the evolutions, that could be a binder or a display board. And essentially what it would be saying is, hey, collect all of the evolutions in Genetic Apex and get some random reward or achievement. I thought display boards might end up just being the playmats, but that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense because that type of cosmetic wouldn't be on the collection screen, or it wouldn't be on this type of screen because we don't see coins or any other type of cosmetic here. So it'd just be odd for playmats to be the only cosmetic that are here. It'd also be weird to not chain your cosmetics specifically to your deck. Like, I assume that that's going to be on the deck screen. When opening a pack, you can actually flip the pack backwards in order to open the pack from back to front. The only reason you want to do that is because the most rare cards are stuck to the back and the less rare cards are stuck to the front. So if you wanted to get that instant hit of dopamine and see what your rarest card was, you can do that simply by flipping the pack over, which I think is pretty cool. Solo challenges are mentioned. I don't want to speculate too much about solo challenges because it's hard to say exactly what that means. It could mean anything from a practice environment to a full-on story mode. So I'll just leave it at that and we'll see what comes of it. I don't want to speculate too much about that or get too hyped about something like that. We'll wait and see. The store also mentions using some type of auto battle feature, which I assume is almost like an AFK mission, kind of like what a lot of mobile games do, where you can kind of just, hey, I want to throw this deck here, I want to throw that out on a mission, and then that mission will be fighting some other player's automated deck. And that'll be it. It would be kind of cool if it's like that, because then there would be fun deck building optimizations for specifically the auto battle thing. Like, oh, maybe this type of card just works better in auto battle than it would in regular battle, because in auto battle, the AI knows how to use this card a bit better than it would if it was a more complicated card or something like that. Each day you log into Pokemon Pocket, you'll get 2 free packs, which is incredible, and you'll get a 3rd pack if you own the premium pass, which is $10. I couldn't tell you how much a pack costs, but what I can tell you is how much Pokegold costs. $5 for a 25 Pokegold, $10 for 50 Pokegold, $20 for 100 Pokegold, $40 for 200 Pokegold, and $100 for 500 Pokegold. There's also another bundle for $23 that'll give you Pokegold plus accessories. I don't know what those accessories are yet. We'll have to wait and see. And then we also have the premium pass for $10. I'd highly recommend getting the premium pass just because it sounds so money efficient. You're going to get an extra pack every day. So over the course of 30 days, it's going to essentially be 30 packs for $10. That's not even taking into account whatever else you get in the premium pass. And the last thing I want to talk about is that the game will be going live in New Zealand before it goes live everywhere else. It's a soft launch, meaning that the game will be out and progress won't be wiped. It's not going to be a beta or anything like that. The game is just releasing early in New Zealand. So if you're in New Zealand or have a way of getting there, I hope you're looking forward to playing Pokemon Pocket. Alright, that's going to be it for me. That was a long video, but that's everything you need to know about Pokemon Pocket.